Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to remind you that you could have already seen this episode by supporting the Poe Museum at patreon.com/Poe Museum. And speaking of Patreon, some of our supporters have been giving us some feedback on what they'd like to see on future episodes of the Curator's Crypt. One of the most frequent comments was they'd like to see more cats. So that's why this week's installment is being introduced by Pluto, the Poe Museum cat. Another Patreon supporter said that they would like to learn more about the Broadway Journal, the magazine that Poe briefly edited while living in New York City. And it just so happens that the museum has several documents and records and first printings of the Broadway Journal. So that's going to be the topic for tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt, brought to you by Pluto. This is Edgar Allan Poe's Dream Come True. Right here. His name on that masthead, it's Edgar Allan Poe's own magazine under his sole editorial control, the Broadway Journal. Actually, I was kind of glad to see that somebody requested that we talk about the Broadway Journal because the museum has all sorts of files. We have the official correspondence for the magazine, so these are the business records. We have things here like the Memoranda of Agreement. These are official contracts when they were founding the magazine, when they made changes to over the years, when ownership shifted from one partner to the other. We have the correspondence. People wrote to Poe. Here's somebody writing Poe a letter. This is somebody trying to sell copies of the magazines in the South and saying how popular Poe still is in Richmond, that all of his friends there love him. And here's another letter addressed to Poe, and it asked him to send some of these back issues and maybe reprint his recent poem, Messenger Star, which he just delivered in Boston. Now, this is New York City where the Broadway Journal is published, and the poem he delivered in Boston was actually his very early poem, Al-Araf, and the reading was terrible. He got a lot of people walking out of the reading. So he said that he just pulled as a practical joke because he hated Bostonians so much. That was his story. But even more, this is somebody who's requesting that he reprint his new poem, The Raven, in the Broadway Journal. So all sorts of great correspondence. A lot of it you see here is just the standard stuff. Here's my money for a subscription. Please send me some issues. But we also get things like this. This is an angry letter from a lawyer complaining about a libelous review of a concert, and actually there's the word libel right there, and the lawyer's threatening to sue this magazine to oblivion if they don't print a retraction. So it's just the sort of thing that Poe had to go through while he was working here. And in addition to standard correspondence, we also have receipts that they kept for the journal. So this is the actual magazine. This is a bound volume. These are all bound volumes of it. It's really a small piece, about 8 pages. It came out every Friday. And what was great about it is that Poe got to let his imagination run wild, publishing his own short stories and poems, but also articles like this, if you can see, Imitation Plagiarism, the conclusion of Mr. Poe's reply to the letter of Aldous. And who's this Aldous? Well, apparently Poe was really attacking the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in review after review, accusing him of plagiarism. Longfellow is a famous poet then, refused to dignify any of these accusations with a response. So an anonymous critic, only using the name Aldous, which means nobody, wrote accusing Poe of plagiarism. So Poe started attacking Aldous and defending himself against Aldous's accusations, which some people think are actually Poe's accusations because they think that Poe was Aldous accusing himself of plagiarism just to keep the literary feud going, which we kind of believe that's the kind of thing Poe might have done. He's known for hoaxes. He also exchanged flirtatious poetry with some of his correspondents. This is a poem signed Violet Vane, and it's written to him, "So let it be," addressed to blank. "Perhaps you think it right and just, since we are bound by near ties, to greet me with that careless tone, with those serene and silent eyes. So let it be. I only know, if I were in your place tonight, I would not grieve your spirit so. For all God's worlds of life and light, I could not turn as you have done from every memory of the past. I could not fling from soul to brow the shade that feeling should have cast." So whoever this is complaining that some gentleman was with his current lady love and was ignoring her. And we later found out this Violet Vane was the poet Francis Sargent Osgood, who might have just seen Poe with his wife and thought that Poe was being too cold for her. How can you treat me like a stranger? You know who I am. And Poe answered it a few issues later with one of his own poems. So here is his response to her. "I would not lord o'er thy heart. Alas, I cannot rule my own, nor would I rob one loyal thought from him who there should reign alone. We both have found a lifelong love wherein our weary souls may rest. Yet may we not, my gentle friend, by each to each the second best? A love which shall be passion-free, fondness as pure as is sweet. A bond where all the dearest ties of brother, friend, and cousin meet." So he's saying, you're married too, so why don't we just be friends? Let's have a bond kind of like friendship and cousins, a love which is passion-free. So that's his response to her. And about the same time Poe was writing this, he was having a relationship with Francis Osgood, and this got uncovered. But over the course of these few issues, we can see that Poe was sharing editorial responsibilities with Charles Briggs and Henry Watson. But eventually Briggs dropped out, and then Watson and the other partner, John Biscoe, dropped out. This is the premature burial right here. This is why you don't want to leave your books open in the sunlight too long. It can get that kind of damage. And Poe finally assumed complete editorial control by the end of the second volume, which is where we started over here, with Poe finally in charge of the magazine. Unfortunately, shortly after Poe got sole editorial of the magazine, he ran out of money. The magazine had to fold, so this would be his last issue as editor and proprietor of the Broadway Journal. And he had to close the door once again on his great dream of running his own journal. But until he died, just a few years later, he continued to try to start his own magazine to be called The Stylus. Unfortunately, he died just before he could realize that dream. He'd found a financial backer, everything was going away, and he died. But that's the thing about life. None of us are getting out of it alive. Well, thanks for joining us again this week. And don't forget to keep those comments coming with suggestions for new topics to cover on future installments of the Curator's Crypt. Until next time, I'll leave you with even more gratuitous footage of the Poe Museum cats.